I just have a little show of hands? Who is an upholsterer or learning upholstery in this room? Is anyone not?
Who isn't?
Oh, two. Excellent. Okay. That's a nice demographic. So you probably may or may not be sat on them, but there are some questionnaires, and it's just something that we've been doing throughout the show, and we've been asking upholsterers to fill them in. So if you want, it's not compulsory. We're not going to lock the door or anything. Don't worry. But if you do want to fill them in, that'd be brilliant, and then just leave them with one of the invigilators before the end of the show. Not this show.
So thanks for coming down. If you haven't looked around the show already, then after these guys have spoken, please do take some time. I know it takes quite a while to get through all those words, but
They're worth it.
they are worth it. It's taken
Took us quite a while.
Yeah, about 2.5, 3 months to compile all of that. So I hope you enjoy it. But I'd rather hand over to these guys because they have something a little bit more interesting to say. So round of applause. Come on.
I am fascinated by the demographic in this room. Put your hand up if you're a boy. Amazing. Well, thank you so much all for coming, especially the two people who aren't upholsterers. Firstly, big thank you to Jude and Hannah for inviting us to do this today. I think this is a really fascinating subject, and I've had some sort of warm-up chats with these guys, and I know we've got a lot of really interesting stuff to talk about, so I'm hoping you'll all really enjoy it. Also wanted to say thank you to the Geffrye Museum for hosting us, and to Short Courses at the CAS who've made this all possible. And just to echo the recommendation to go and see the exhibition if you haven't already, it's really, really fantastic. So I'll do some introductions. I usually forget to introduce myself, so I've actually written down on my piece of paper, introduce yourself. I'm Katie Tregiddon. I'm a journalist. I write primarily about design, craft, architecture, that sort of thing, for the likes of The Guardian, Crafts Magazine, Elle Decoration. I've written 3 books, just sent my 3rd one to the publisher. It's about pottery, sadly, so probably none of you will be interested in it, but it is out in October. And I've got this fabulous panel of people with me to talk upholstery. I was about to say pottery then. Wrong room. So I'll start from the far end. Alex Law is from the School of Upholstery. Alex is a bench-trained upholsterer who has orated his passion for the design and craft elements of upholstery through making, writing and teaching. Equally at home in a headboard factory using an automatic staple gun, in a craft workshop using only needles, or in his own classroom, Alex's mission is to ensure that the traditional skills of an upholsterer can thrive and continue to evolve as a living craft. And then we have Corinne, Frame and Cover founder and director. Award-winning Frame and Cover was born out of a commitment to create modern and bespoke UK-made home furnishings using wholly sustainable methods. And I'm going to press Corinne in a bit on quite what she means by wholly sustainable. Corinne is a trained upholsterer and textile designer with many years' experience working in the industry. I love the way we've sat boy, girl, by the way. That's lovely. Tim Cox is the managing director of Coakley & Cox, and they produce furniture for high-end brands like SCP, Heels and David Linley. Their products are all made by hand using a blend of traditional and modern upholstery techniques with the use of non-petrochemical based alternatives to foam where possible. And I think we're going to get into a bit of a foam debate, pros and cons, the evils of foam. And then just next to me is Ella. Ella Doran is an award-winning designer and entrepreneur who's been running her own East London-based business practice since the mid-90s. Striving to produce sustainably in collaboration with her manufacturers, Ella also promotes the design industry's shift towards a circular economy. So we'll be touching on exactly what the circular economy is and what it means to us. So, Corinne, I'm going to start with you if that's okay.
Please do.
You founded Frame and Cover because you couldn't find manufacturers who could create what you wanted using wholly sustainable methods. So could you start by explaining wholly sustainable and telling us some of the issues you were coming up against in looking for manufacturers?
So to me, wholly sustainable means it's the materials that you use in your products, and then also the people that are making the products. So you know, I'm quite keen on British-made products, but I believe in supporting the British industry. but knowing that the people that are being paid to make your products are being well looked after and everything's above board, but then also the materials that you use. I've come across people that will describe their products as being sustainable, but actually they've gone as far as to use FSC certified wood, and I've personally felt that wasn't enough when you consider all the other components, particularly in chairs, that go into making them. I mean, springs, you can recycle those. Foam, you can't recycle that, so that was the first thing that I chucked out. The polyester wadding, you've got other options that you can use in terms of interliners, and then also the fabric. I design fabric, so I sourced the base cloth that passed the Okeotex 100, and then I digitally print, and I print to order. So that to me, and then I mean, you can take it as far as you like really with sustainable. You can think about the packaging it comes in. I was looking at the stains on my legs, the legs of the chairs, not my legs. Like using beeswax instead of a lacquer, and then an eco stain instead of a non-eco stain. So I try to follow all the materials that I would, that would be used in a chair, and try to use the best materials that could be recycled or returned to the ground, basically. So that's
I think it's interesting though, because I mean, I've even heard people describing their products as sustainable because they're so well designed, no one's ever going to throw them away.
Well,
so it doesn't matter what they're made from.
I will argue that does come up in the circular economy issue, but that's not
we'll
job.
come on to
But
that.
it does. It is an interesting.
But it's interesting,
point.
isn't it? Because sustainable is one of those words I think that's bandied about.
Yeah,
very
massively.
There's no sort of legal definition as to what one means by that. So when you are working as hard as you are to be wholly sustainable, it's about how you articulate that, I suppose, to a certain extent, and how you get that message across.
And then if you look at upholstery as a trade itself, like, it is pretty much the ultimate in terms of you get someone bringing their chair to you, and you're repurposing it, you're redoing the fillings, and you're putting another cover on it, and you're giving it a second life. And that is kind of, to me, as sort of sustainable as you can get, especially if you use kind of green fabric. But trying to source those chairs, if you're going to make a viable business out of it and sell the chairs, as a standalone piece rather than under instruction from someone else, I found tricky, because you have to source the chairs, you have to spend time building relationships with antiques dealers, and that takes as much time as it does to actually upholster the things. So that's why I went down the manufacturing route. And as you were asking about sort of problems, it was a challenge finding manufacturers that were willing to disrupt how they produce. If you kind of look at the Long-Eaton type manufacturers, and I was wanting to produce furniture that I could scale and that I could sell in volume, and those guys were reluctant to work with me because they used foam so much that it was bringing down their margins, making my furniture expensive, and they weren't willing. And these were people that I built relationships with during my time at Laura Ashley. I knew them. It wasn't as if I was just cold calling them. So then if you go to the other ends of it, where you use kind of independent upholsterers, you then have the issue of then scaling up from there, if you, again, with the volume thing. So I've been quite lucky that I've now found a manufacturer that is willing to work flexibly, mainly I think because producing upholstered furniture isn't their main business. It's contracts, they do all sorts. So they were quite happy to work with me because I was just one of their projects that they were working within. So it was quite an interesting process to go through, so that I come on guys, this is going to be great, really nice furniture, and they're like, nah, it hits our margins, sorry.
So what's so wrong with foam? What is the problem?
Well, it's the petrochemicals mainly, in that they are pretty harmful to the environment. So from a manufacturing point of view,
in the production
of the foam,
yeah,
they're not good chemicals to be using, and they don't break down. There's no recyclability of it. I mean, yes, you can turn it into chip foam if you do recycle it, but that's as low as it goes, and it kind of stops at that point. You can't then do anything else with it. and foam degrades over time anyway, and the air bubbles within a piece of foam will pop, and which is why foams collapse, which is why we have to reupholster them and what have you, or it turns to dust. So for us, when we started moving away from using foams, it was about trying to source initially natural materials that we can use in a commercial environment. So I think most people use NKEV provided products, Coakley rubberized hair, needled wool, all those sort of materials, which I have got samples with me, but they're, excuse me, most of you are probably familiar with them, but they are, for us, they're the closest we can get to having a material that is a replacement for foam, and that we don't have to do much with it.
So perhaps I can ask the opposite question. What's so right about foam? Why is everybody holding on to foam so much?
Because it does a lot more than the natural materials can do.
Right.
And
I think on its own, that's the point, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is just one medium that covers so many bases.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually enables large-scale manufacturing because of the skills that are required to understand the properties of each material, and then understand them within the context of a system, whereas foam actually
cuts it.
Foam you can buy in as a kit. So if you've got a produced piece that you're doing enough volume of, you can say to the manufacturer, here are all the shapes, supply me these densities on this and foam, and you literally get it, and you just put the inside arm, outside arm on, inside back, outside back,
So they supply it to you
all pre-cut,
nice.
which in theory it's more environmentally friendly because they're chopping it up, and they're because they're the manufacturer, there's less waste than if we buy a sheet of foam and cut all the shapes out that we need. But I don't really want to.
You could do that. I mean, if you could do that with a piece of Coakley. I also think it's because it's become an accepted thing that foam is the go-to material in modern upholstery.
It's just people not thinking.
I just think it's. I was looking at the foam industry, and the polyurethane industry by 2021 is predicted to be worth something like £74 billion. So when you've got an industry that's as large as that, then no wonder people are just like, oh yeah, foam, just put it in. It's they can sell it in volume. It's produced in volume. Yeah.
But some of these materials don't generally. I mean, we did have a project where the Merchants Tavern just down in Shoreditch, we supplied them with all the banquette seating in there about 3 years ago, and we used natural materials because that was the brief throughout. 6 months later, we had to go in and take out and replace it, and actually put foam into the seats because the client and customers just weren't happy enough, because there's with this there's just no resilience to it, and but at the same time they didn't want to pay us to
to redo it.
They didn't want to pay us initially to use
Okay.
traditional materials
so they
where
do
you
accept they've learned.
so
Although
that was the compromise.
That does fascinate me that's what we're dealing with, is this issue of things lasting longer under the pressure of this commerce of bars and what have you, so which I guess is where why everything's escalated, because of more people on the planet and more of us demanding and needing these things. It is interesting though. So then, did that put you off using it on other commercial projects?
Yeah, definitely. So, but we have got a mix. So, we do still use some foams on some of the commercial things, but we try, on backs, for example, we will always use rubberized hair or cocoa lock and needled wool, which we buy in as a sheet, and we can cut it to shape and upholster our piece. But most of anything that's a fixed seat now will have foam in it, because we've tried to use a combination of these materials.
I think just one thing, I know it's not necessarily what I should be talking now, but one thing, it's almost like foam could just be, if it could just be commercial, maybe we'd be in a healthier place. Because one thing I've learned through the work that I did with the Great Recovery was this issue of the foam. Is that why we've got such stringent fire retardant issues now? Because foam is so flammable. Is that not why it all came about in such a big way?
Basically.
And yet in our homes we're sitting, or so many people with their DFS sofas,
inhaling the stuff on this because of the foam sofas that we've got.
So now you go.
We've got this issue, you know, we're making
and
ourselves
this
ill
is
in that way.
wholly unrelated to sustainability, but you go to America
Yeah.
and California fire regulations, they're now promoting you not having or not using
Exactly.
fire retardant chemicals
Bring it
because
on.
of the poisons
That's what we need.
that are
We need to
involved
bring
in
that
it.
here.
But
Of
what
course
we
it's
need as a
California.
globe is we need a global standard.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
We cannot have one country having one standard,
Yes.
Europe having another
Yes.
standard, and Great
Yes.
Britain having
Yeah.
another standard.
I'm
That
telling
is completely
Yes,
inappropriate.
bonkers.
And companies like FIRA need to be doing more to making
Make
it
that
a global
happen.
thing.
Yeah.
And making it easier for everyone to understand what the actual fire
Yeah.
regulations are.
Totally.
Because I'm sure all of you upholsterers have read that document, and it's
Yeah, it's
appalling.
painful. Yeah, it's scary.
No, but then they make a lot of money off holding them.
Well,
you
yeah,
know,
that's true, yeah.
your
To
conferences.
explain it.
Yeah.
Ellie, you touched on the Great Recovery Project.
Mm.
Can you tell us a little bit about that experience? Because I know
Yes.
that was
It was a
life,
real
would
eye-opener.
life-changing
Yes.
be overstating
Yeah,
it.
well,
It had a big impact on
Completely,
you.
It had a big impact. So I was invited to join a group of designers on a residency to research bulky waste. And we started in a waste site in Leatherhead. And the deal was to kind of, as the brief was to, well, the facts are 1.6 million tonnes of waste goes to landfill in this country every year. Now that was a RAP report from 2014. I'd be fascinated to know if
It is
it's gone
today.
down or if it's increased hugely, because things are happening within this cycle. But so the brief, so we started knowing that, and we were like these anthropologists watching the people for the day, it openly, not with binoculars hiding.
So
but
this is at a
this is at the
standard
waste
tip
site, recycling tip.
with people just bringing
Yes,
their own
bringing,
household waste.
turning up, being very virtuous because they're coming to a recycling centre. And this couple turned up with a big sofa in their 4x4, pulled it out, and we were watching this, and then immediately it got chucked in the tip because the chap checked for it, no fire label. No fire label goes to tip. So we're also in a stitch, I think, in this country for that mere
Yeah.
issue. It's so ignorant to say, oh, well, that goes in the bin now because there is no fire label, so we can't reuse it. And there are FRNs, as I'm sure you all know, and if you don't, please write down FRN on your paper and look up furniture reuse networks, because they're crying out for those sort of sofas, although some of them, because of law, won't take them for that reason.
But what
Because
do they
they
do?
can't.
They can
can't-
take them and strip them
well,
down.
they could. So this is what we then did. So we asked for permission to take it off the skip again and take it back to the Fab Lab down in London, and we unpicked it. And there's a film now called The Survivor Sofa Story, which kind of documents this. And we unpicked it. It took 4 of us. It was a Laura Ashley sofa, funnily enough. And it had, what was really fascinating, it had a previous life already, the frame, because you
been
could tell
stripped
from the
off,
staples,
yeah.
and of course you all understand that. So it did have cardboard, it had foam, it had a zillion staples. I mean, we had hands full of the staples. But the frame in itself, which you have probably seen it circulating in these pictures, it wasn't beautiful, but it was worth it in itself a good 100 odd quid, and we're throwing that away. We've also got at the scale of the FRN people, the Furniture Reuse Network, work with government because they integrate the furniture that you do give to them back into society, to those that need it. But we've still got this level of where we're chucking away. So we then took it a next step within the residency and fortuitously met Chimera at a waste management event. They were working on a woolen textile, working with wool waste. Not purely, because that's an impossibility with wool, because you get short fibres and long fibres. So they were mixing the short, recycled, pre-consumer wool with virgin wool. And their whole thing with us was to play with how much they could stretch it, i.e. how big a volume can we take in terms of recycled versus the virgin to still make it durable for industry. And that was 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago. They still haven't got it to market. Interestingly, I pushed them because I did get a project going so I sort of engineered 60 odd metres, and that taught them a lot in itself. But what they're finding is that they need to communicate more about what we were saying. So they get pre-consumer wool from all their, as they termed it, competitors as well as their own factories, but they have issues with contamination. Contamination meaning that there must be the odd bit of poly getting in there,
Yeah, some
polyester
glue
or glue,
yeah.
all sorts of things. So, and this is what came out for me with the Great Recovery, was this thing of roundtable discussions, more communication with waste managers, with the recyclers. Actually, should we not stop calling it waste and let's start calling it material value sites, and let's, you know, become the people that come and take the stuff from this. So I'm passionate now about engaging in that way, not least with the younger designers that are coming up, to be thinking of that from the start. So when they're coming up with their latest chair design, that they're thinking that, I mean, you know, part of what the circular economy is about is designing for longevity, but also for passing on the material value into the next stream. So I guess I like to think of it that we are all working together on that, and the more, I think, I'd love to help people get better at communicating.
And I think us as designers can help affect manufacture,
Yes,
because
definitely.
if we
Definitely.
are going to the manufacturers saying this is what we want,
Yeah.
how can we produce this?
Do you think there is an arrogance / optimism amongst designers that when they're designing a new product, the last thing they're thinking about is it being thrown away, got rid of, given away?
I think we've come from that. I think the 80s was a massive splash of that. And I think we're really engaging in a very exciting new way of thinking.
Yeah, because you almost, you know, I don't know if it was you that told me, but somebody told me about a TV and a tip, and the guy who was taking it to bits was like, if this had been designed with like 2 fewer screws, it could be entirely recycled. I can't remember the details, but it was like tiny little design tweak would have made it entirely recyclable. As it was, it all had to be junked.
Well, kettles are built-in obsolescence. I mean, I've read this fascinating paper that was when built-in obsolescence was invented, post-war America. If anyone wants it, I can email it. It's a fascinating read because it's political. It's like this. It's all about industry and keeping people in business and in labour, and therefore we all help each other. So it wasn't designed to end up with one fat big dump that we're ruining stuff with. So I think at some point we've lost contact and reality with material value, and kind of I'm all for imbuing, you know, more into the value of things and realising that. I mean, you know, we're laughing at what my studio's like. I can't throw anything away. That's my problem.
So what can, you mentioned that designers have a role to play here. What can designers do to make this easier for manufacturers? Do designers understand enough about the environmental implications of the materials they're specifying? Do they know enough about upholstery to make changes in those?
Quite possibly not. I mean, I sort of was aware of it when I was designing for Laura Ashley, and obviously I was kind of enslaved to slight strategy and margins there. So, but I certainly was aware of it, and I did question it. But it was actually only on really training to be an upholsterer when I really learnt about what material possibilities there were, and I think where you have when you're designing, you have a curiosity and an engagement with your design in terms of its look, and you need to also sort of encouraging designers to think more about the materials that they're using, and you know, that's as much as the design process. And
but I think there's also something in the fact that university courses are becoming increasingly about head knowledge, not hand knowledge. You know, there's a lot more learning done via computers and via lectures, and a lot less making. And I mean, Judith's shared some horror stories with me about sort of designers and upholsterers, and never the two shall meet, and within the education system. Alex, do you think there is a need for more collaboration between thinkers and makers, or thinking and making?
Oh, very, very much so. You know, Jude and I both had experience where it was easier to actually deal with companies the other end of the country than it was a department across the corridor, and it was actually, you know, far more efficient and often a better result. But can I just quickly go back to the previous point?
Of course.
I think with designers, there is a thing called the Sale of Goods Act that unfortunately it was meant for consumer protection, but it's also become a caveat for how long something is required under legislation to last.
That's interesting.
So designers.
So the Sale of Goods Act said that a product must last for a reasonable period of time, and then that's defined for different categories.
With regards, as you know, with fire and the way the Sale of Goods Act works, essentially, a a retailer is obliged to address any concerns from a customer, for and as independent makers, people have to adhere to this. You're obliged for 6 years to address the concerns of the purchaser, and then on a sliding scale of responsibility, which go from, I think, right of reject is 6 weeks. So after 6 weeks, the customer loses the right to automatically reject the unit, whether it's a sofa, a chair, or a coffee table or something, and then you have a sliding scale of obligation, financial, and then what's expected for you to fix it. But that is basically saying this product has to last for 6 years. After that point, actually everything is irrelevant.
Which,
So
when we think about the furniture that many of us have handed down from our grandparents, 6 years is nothing in the.
Well, put in the hands of organisations that essentially are finance houses that are using the medium of furniture to sell their products.
That's so
And
beautifully
the
put.
financial agreement generally lasts around 5 years with a 18-month holiday at the beginning.
Right.
Kind of the numbers start adding up, and you start thinking, well, why are we caught in this sort of little cycle? So, yeah, sorry, going back a little bit, but certainly within education, we do need to join up, and there's several, including myself, there's several private educators here. We all run our own little upholstery schools, doing our bit, trying to sort of embody the traditions of the bench, and sort of, be that conduit and pass on in our own little way the sort of 600 years worth of accrued knowledge. It's getting more difficult for us to, because we are fragmenting. The higher education has pretty much sort of dropped upholstery, certainly during my lifetime, and then adult education, particularly over the last 10 years, it's no accident that more and more of us are setting up our own schools, because obviously, well, on two levels. Partly we're losing contracted hours as tutors, or we're losing our jobs completely, but also the demand is clearly there as these institutes sort of close down and reduce the hours in the courses and what have you, or push fees up, make student staff ratios so massive that actually it doesn't feel like a value return for anyone, either the tutor or the student. So I feel there's a definite challenge there for us as individual trainers to sort of try and link up and actually support each other in some way, and actually not be fearful of one another from a competitive point of view, but actually try and work ways that we can sort of collaborate as an industry, and then actually communicate to the design world that manufacturing and having skills in manufacturing actually isn't a negative thing that says a lot about your creativity. It is actually quite an empowering thing. So if I have a client where I design for the 3-letter stores and so forth, these guys are designing, I'm designing products, training their R&D teams, and that work is then being filtered back to the bench. They're genuinely retailing tens of thousands of these units every year.
And you're training them?
I work generally with the R&D team. I've helped set up one line, which was a bit interesting. Sort of, I've never had to produce a flow chart before. I had to Google it. I had to find out what it was. But so that side of it, the thing that's actually worked really well for me has been able to walk in there as a designer and actually cut a pace on the bench with the people that I'm training.
Yeah.
So and it actually demonstrating, when you're offering a target or something, or trying to achieve a certain form, if you're actually empowered to be able to make it yourself, or get a really close example, I tend to find that works well across the board.
Yeah, and that's the thing, as designers, the more you know about the materials that you're using, the more credible you sound to your manufacturer, and the more that you're actually going to get out of them as well, because they're going to engage with you because you seem like you know what you're talking about, and and want to push it and explore it to try and get to the end result.
Well, and of course there is a mirror for that. That actually, I think upholsterers, certainly independent upholsterers. Well, I guess you guys too. You're actually used to, or certainly now we're more used to communicating with designers and actually helping them through our either resource knowledge or process knowledge, actually helping them find the form. And I think certainly with the democratisation of technology, free software out there. I learned CAD from watching YouTube really, and using free software.
We have whenever we bring out new products, actually we have the designers come up to the factory and spend at least 1 if not 2 days at the factory, seeing how we use the materials and work with the materials, because they don't have that understanding of how certainly some of the more natural materials used, or even foams and whatever. So I find that makes it a much easier process having them there, and being able to participate in the production process.
Well, the benefit reciprocates them because inherently they will tend to try and target either materials or dimensions that you're familiar with as a manufacturer. So your bills of materials and kind of controlled and what have you. So.
And it's allowed us, by them seeing how we use the sustainable or the more natural materials, it's helped them alter their designs slightly. So we're, as the manufacturer, kind of helping them design a better product as well. So it's a two-way thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Tim, you told me that you had to go through quite a big process of retraining and reskilling your stuff when you moved towards using more natural materials. Can you tell us a bit about that?
We started, I think it was 2009. We started, I think we'd probably come across NGEV, and it was just that Sheridan decided that he wanted to try and take the company in a slightly different direction. And we wanted to start using more natural products, so we had to go through a very steep learning curve. One, to source the materials that we were able to use in a commercial environment. I mean, literally the very first natural materials that we got into the factory were loose coconut fibre and horsehair, and we all looked at it and just went nervous. But through about a year-long process, we and it was the Oscar sofa that was the first product that we manufactured using natural materials, and it took a good 6-7 months for us to go through different 5 or 6 iterations of the prototype before we all decided that we were happy. And a lot of the products that we've produced, certainly for SCP over the years, have always been foam kits on our wooden frames, and the covers are all pre-sewn as full covers, and then they're applied in one hit and pulled off and tacked off. Well, as soon as you start using natural materials, they slide around all over the place. We couldn't at the beginning, we couldn't upholster it in the same way, so we had to kind of go back to a more traditional way of applying the covers to the arms first, and then doing the inside backs, and then the seats, and then the outsides, etc. So we had to kind of just start learning and teaching our upholsterers and seamstresses how to start.
There's a definite difference between manufacturing upholstery and what you guys do. I mean, it's a completely different process.
Some of the guys that we don't employ. We employ 17 people, and we only have 5 upholsterers. 3 of them have come from the likes of Multi-York, where they are on an upholstery line, and all they do is they just slap an inside arm on day in, day out, or an outside or whatever. So they had to learn how to start handling the materials, so that we're not just, you're not given a finished cover that you tack off. You're actually given a cover that you have to work it and manipulate it and trim it and reset. So,
and how have they responded to that change in?
A couple of them, it was quite hard, but they all now, if a new product comes on board, they're not thinking, we'll just put a bit of foam on it. They are thinking, how can we make this using the natural materials that we are sourcing, which is so it makes the whole process when the designers do come up much easier to create a prototype or a sample and what have you. And it's meant that, because we're much more confident with it now, we're going to our other customers and saying, okay, right, let's start looking at changing this component and to a natural material rather than foams and things.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because to a sort of very much non-expert, all of this stuff is hidden.
Yeah.
I couldn't look at a sofa and tell you what was inside it, whether they were natural materials or foam, whether it had been traditionally upholstered or manufactured. And so I guess if we're talking about the sustainability of upholstery, part of that is this keeping those skills alive and keeping the traditional skills that you've had to go back to. You know, it's a good job there are still people around who understand those skills. So is that part of this, and how can we make sure those sort of traditional upholstery skills are passed on to the next generation?
Alex.
I think,
Outside of manufacturing new, obviously reupholstery is the way that most upholsterers actually get exposed to old materials and techniques. I sit here
I was
and
actually gonna
probably fill a week
Yeah.
with anecdotes.
How
and-
many chairs have you reupholstered that have come in with foam? Out of interest.
Thousands.
Oh really? Oh, that's interesting. Okay, because I wondered if they were generally always not foam
Well,
because of
I think post 88, when the fire regulations changed, the industry, the petrochemical foam industry, actually I don't think they're evil. They had a thing to. They were on a back foot, so the foam materials that were out there actually weren't really fit for purpose, and I think it probably took until the mid-90s before actually they caught up with themselves and got back to a position where the quality of the foam was where it was at the back end of the 80s before the legislation changed anyway. So there was a huge cycle, in the 90s. We had so much stuff at the back end of the 90s coming through where the foam had just turned into thin little sandwiches rather than anyone who's taken apart a chair from the 60s. We tend to find sand.
Yeah.
Or
It's just not there.
it's sort of, you open it, a tweed cushion, and there's powder billowing out. That's obviously, and we haven't really hit the cycle yet of those more resilient and fit for purpose foams.
We're fortunate enough that the sofas that I've been at SCP for 20 odd years, so we're now reupholstering pieces that when I started I was delivering myself. But what's nice about those is that we genuinely are not having to do anything but take the cover off and put a new cover on. We're not replacing any foam, we're not replacing any, even the Dacron over it is not being replaced. It's just take the cover off, put a new cover on. And for me that's what this is all about. And it's making a product that is going to last, to be able to hand down to your grandchildren or your children, knowing that it can be stripped off and just a new cover put on it. And we're doing it more and more. That is becoming a bigger part of our business, is recovering pieces that are 20 years old.
Well, that's we applaud it.
Yeah. And it's really nice knowing that it comes back and it's intact.
Do you have the same confidence using the natural materials as you would do? Do you think?
Yeah, I think we do.
Yeah.
I think we've as part of that kind of whole learning process, we learned, and doing a project like the Merchant's Tavern, we learned where we cannot put rubberized hair.
Yeah, sure.
And we've kind of made that compromise. So I know now that, in backs and things like that, this is absolutely fine and is going to be resilient and is future-proofed. But if you put 6 layers of that in a seat, it's going to be like your sheet of foam. It's only going to be, an inch thick instead of 6 inches thick in a year's time or 10 years' time. So
we're talking about using some sort of quite traditional techniques to solve some very modern problems. And that's a neat segue to the beach clean chair, I think, Alex, which some of these pictures at the moment aren't necessarily resonating with what we're talking about. So I'd love you to tell us a little bit about this project, because I think this is a really interesting example of that.
It'd be disingenuous if I said the beach clean chair came from, it wasn't bench led, very much so. It's something that I've habitually done most of my life. Was a water user. I've always been quite aware of the things that are either coming down rivers or out into the seas and whatever, because I'm either canoeing through it, swimming through it, or surfing, or attempting to surf on it. and through Instagram and moving my studios into an art centre, I became aware of the 2-minute beach clean movement, which is just this beautifully empowering little message that sort of encourages people when you're on the beach, just try and spend the last couple of minutes picking up some waste and putting it in a bin. And then along this sort of current trajectory that we seem to be moving around towards reviewing what is sustainability, as a small example of that, I stopped putting it in the bin and started holding this stuff in my hand and thinking, what can I actually do with it? And as an upholsterer, how can I make this waste material into a resource and you know, in a very small sort of way? So what do we use when we're, you know, what are the properties of the fibres that we're using when we're upholstering? You know, why do certain fibres work and certain ones not? You know, what is the difference between a coconut fibre, a horsehair, say, and a wool? There's resilience properties there. There are obviously ways we stitch it to make different forms and what have you. And I found that the fishing line that I was picking up, the twisted rope thing, is essentially replicating the concept of putting horsehair or coconut fibre in a skein, leaving it in that form for however long, and then when it gets unwound, actually it becomes springy, which is all about, you know, the resilience thing. You know, compression is one thing in the seating, but we all know actually there needs to be a return, and that really is the driver of whether a material is suitable or not. And it was just, I don't think it was an epiphany moment, but it was this slow realisation through the dozens and dozens of hours of collecting. No illusion, there wasn't suddenly this magic bag of stuff that I could pick up. You know, it was coming from the beach, and also from the fishermen themselves, but also I'm very lucky that there's a boatyard working barge rights and ship rights not too far from my studio. They have skips and they have lengths of rope. Some of it's new, some of it's sort of being used, and within that there were different properties that I found I could use. Some seemed to be suitable for stitching, so I used that around the edge, applied the sort of more Georgian well-edged technique, stitched those, and then filled the space, rather inspired by, you know, everyone will have an example where you open up a seat and you cannot believe what it's been stuffed in. And if that object's come from, or if that's been in there since the 1930s, we actually can't, you know, applying the Sailor Goods Act, it's only got to be fit for purpose for 6 years. Well, obviously it's done rather more than that. So I applied that model to the really natty sort of, or knitted, matted fishing net generally, that went into the centre of the seat, and then I used the finest stuff for a second stuffing over the top, or I suppose technically third stuffing, and lo and behold, it was there. You know, the chair as well. Obviously, I wouldn't be able to sell it as a chair. It's doesn't comply with the fire regulations amended in 1994, but. You know, it certainly serves, hopefully, as an example to other upholsterers out there that, you know, we can apply traditional models and use our hand skills. If we're out and about looking at different fibres and different materials, then do we need other people to actually empower us as upholsterers to discover these new materials? We could probably be doing that ourselves. Most of us tend to, you know, upholstery, I tend to find you've got two types of people, you know, wild generalisation, please forgive me. You get two types of people who can find a form. Those that chisel in to a block and find a shape, and then those that inherently, like most upholsterers, will take different ingredients and build those together to make a three-dimensional form. So if you step into that hat, you know, and apply that every minute, every day when you're out living your life, you could probably actually find different fibres out there that could be quite useful.
Do you think there's a future in waste reappropriation in upholstery? Is there other ways to get around the fire retardant regulations?
Well, fire
Well,
around
not to
them.
get around them, you know.
I think
something,
influence them. I think we need to
I
be
think
at
it's
that level.
Let's
of
not cause house fires here,
sitting
but
on the board and changing
Yeah.
that.
yeah,
That's what I
is
wanna do.
there a way
Yeah.
to safely use waste in upholstery? Let's rephrase the question.
Yes.
Yeah, I definitely think so.
we
And
we are going there.
I think you know the
Blown.
rest of the world manages to use sofas without fire retardant foams. It's just the UK that doesn't.
It's we
you
have
don't
to kind
hear
of, as a
yeah.
collective, we have
Yeah.
to petition against that.
Yeah,
and
it is.
complain and make that change, because that's the only way it will come
Yeah.
about. Is pushing for it really. I mean, it's really fascinating to hear that California have done that. Then that
Yeah.
that has happened.
It's not law yet, but it's
Well,
it's
the
a
fact that it is,
suggestion.
yeah.
So in terms of getting, I mean, these are the sort of things that the design industry and the craft industry love to discuss on panel events. But in terms of getting this stuff into the mainstream to normal DFS sofa buying customers, I think you mentioned, Tim, that using natural products adds a 12 to 13% cost premium onto a product.
Yeah, roughly. Yeah.
Are people willing to pay extra for natural products for sustainability? If not, how can we start to get the message out there that they ought to?
I mean, it's a difficult one because certainly at SCP, who like the Oscar sofa is sold through, they don't really promote it as being a sustainable sofa. It's only if you read into the nitty gritty of the website or catalogues that you find out that it is made, and people are accepting of the price of that sofa. So yes, I think people can be accepting of a higher price sofa. I think it's about educating people to understand that this piece of furniture, our furnitures, we guarantee the frames for life, because we use solid beech. We don't use any softwoods. We we joint all the joints are sound. They're finished properly.
But do you think
so
there's something in
so I
today's
think-
kind of fast, trend-driven, social media obsessed culture that means people don't necessarily want a sofa for life?
Yeah,
Well,
that is also the
That is-
truth. That is the case. It's very much, and I've seen this happen over the last few years, is that the design or fashion is playing a massive part in the furniture industry, to the detriment of I think of product design, in terms of a retailer will take on a product, put it on their shop floor. If they haven't had enough sales within 6 months, they drop it. And the
we
Balzac.
spoke to those retailers
Yeah,
on our great recovery.
yeah,
Did you?
the Balzac sofa, or the Balzac armchair that Matthew Hilton designed 30 years ago or 20 years ago, took 2 years to develop. It took 2 years before the Conran shop bought it. If that had been produced or designed now, it wouldn't be as an iconic piece as it is. It wouldn't become as an iconic piece.
We're losing the ability for iconicness because of
definitely.
But then there is more of a conversation now in fashion about the slow fashion movement, and I think there is there seems to be more talk about buy once, buy well, and I think things always go in waves, don't they? You have a very sort of throwaway culture, and then at some point there was a backlash, and
Which is
I
definitely
think we're
happening.
entering.
we're in that.
We're in that, and
That's why the retailers, the big retailers, are having to think.
But there are
Yeah.
still things
Strategically
that change in terms of style.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, people are now.
But then but why can't you? I mean, so like I was saying earlier, is yes, you buy a sofa that can be reupholstered in Europe. I think they have a lot of the European sofas that are manufactured by Cappellini, Morosa, etc. They're loose covers. They're tight-fitting loose covers. You peel that cover off and you recover it. We do quite a few of those, and then there's little upholstery work because it's all cold cast foams over steel frames, but the tailoring and the seamstress work is phenomenal, and
Well,
I think that's
interesting,
where we
if
need
you
to
look
learn
at
more.
The work of I don't know if anybody's
Morosa.
familiar with
Yeah.
the Swedish-French design duo Farg Blanche, and they actually make furniture that has different outfits.
Yeah.
So you can, it's sort of wooden frame chairs, and you can slip different leather sort of backs on for different
I know.
occasions. So it's that
Yeah,
idea of
yeah.
having something that is inspired by fashion and changeable, and yet that you're going to keep that same piece of furniture for.
You do still get people wanting to have a cover for their sofa for the winter and a cover for their sofa in the summer, and I think that you could do. We try to on some of the products. We try where we can. But in terms of integrating the kind of the fashion side of it, you could have a cover that is zany and wacky and what have you, that you have for your dinner parties or whatever, your mates around for, and then one that you don't mind getting knackered, and then you have your Sunday best. I
think people quite like stories though, so if something's designed well, it visually looks amazing, and then it has this story about sustainability. This is particularly something I've been learning as a startup. If your story's good, and people will buy into your brand, and it's that kind of thing. If you can tell a story about
a genuine story,
authentic,
genuine, yes.
I think this is a story that I know SCP find hard to tell, because is it green? Is it sustainable? What is it that you're trying to sell? Because the production of the materials that we're using, there's still polyester on the back of the needled wool.
Value. I think that's what we need to all be selling, is value of material, and to appreciate and pass on skill, but not least. So from the circular point of view, it would be about if fashion tells you that you don't want that sofa anymore, and the designers come up with something, then it does go on to its next life through as much of that piece as possible being reused. So we did come in the early 20s from a very monomaterial furniture that would be metal and big screws, and everything was easier to take apart in a way, and the value. I mean, I was dealing with some James Leonard school desks, for instance, amazing metal cast base, Formica top. Now Formica, I deal in Formica, that's not sustainable. It will live longer than all of us. But if it's a great design, you can take that off. You can actually put it through a recycled thing that can then go on to another life as some chipped up plastic. But I guess I think if in pieces, if we can think about it, I mean, actually, you wanted to design for longevity, but then you also want to design for reuse or recycling, and being able to understand what those materials are.
And I guess it's a question of how you package all that.
Get that across.
And get retailers to take some of the responsibility.
I mean,
I think that's
rather
very
than
important too.
Point at sale.
Well, that's down to all of us, because that's down to what we ask. So at John Lewis, for instance, I will mention, they were within this group, as were IKEA. IKEA have got a fascinating kind of, they are a little ecosystem, a big ecosystem in their own right. They do take back their stuff that you could complain is turning up. I mean, when we were at the waste site, some stuff was coming still in its packet, and it was going into the waste. Someone said, I just don't want it, it's the shelving. Don't need it.
Bothered making
it. But they, IKEA itself actually heats their own retail buildings on their crates and torn up wood and fibre from their very cheap rate stuff, because again, through this residency, it was a lot of like, is this the problem? It's like, well, we're all part of the big organism that we're on, this planet, and it's like, actually, the more we can get to talk about and have people this is why I think it's fascinating they were taking you on at the 3-letter word place. There's something in that if we design those pieces to still be better, that's still great, because that's getting a chair to someone who really can't afford this 18
Well, and actually, I suppose
the
impact of making those sofas a little bit better times across all those sofas
it's going to be
is
good.
arguably
It's
as
a good
impactful
thing.
of making some of these higher end sofas completely good.
I do think we need
there's
we
a
need the
scale
whole
point
spectrum.
there, isn't there?
Yeah.
Right, I've got
Because
one
we've
more
got the spectrum
question
of people.
for the panel, and then I'm coming to you guys. So start thinking about your questions. Someone's going to have to be brave and stick up their hand first. So if you've got a question, please be that person. Right, so to each of you, this is quite a hard question. We've got a room full of upholsterers here. So if you were to advise them one thing they could do to be more sustainable, or the biggest lesson you've learned in your journey towards sustainability that you could share, what would it be? Go.
Pass it on. When you at some point, train somebody else. You've got to, you are indebted to a system that allowed you to gain some knowledge. So, just pass it on.
Nice.
when you get a commission from someone, inform them about the possible materials that they could use or are available in the reupholstery process, and encourage them, give them a choice and encourage them to move away from using foam and, you know, using rubberized hair or a wool interliner instead. You know, just you informing your customers.
Would you not just do that anyway, rather than telling them that you're going? That's what your client's not going to say to you. I'd like to have a foam core with a
No,
with a
but it's always
polyester
about
interliner.
cost, isn't it? So when you're costing a project,
Yeah.
you
Then you're explaining. Yeah. Okay. So
I,
rather.
as an upholsterer, would probably initially I'd look at the chair and be like, it was in foam to begin with.
Yeah.
I know that possibly they might be a cost implication, and
Yeah.
like talk to them about the materials that you use.
So advise them to
Yeah.
use to
Yeah.
pay a little bit more money. I mean,
Yeah.
I think my advice would be use the best quality materials that you can get, and build it well so that it will last a lifetime. And if you, I guess, if somebody else can pick this up in 5 years' time, how will they, or 6 years' time? How can I make it simply so that they can strip it off and recover it in a cost-effective way? I think it's about not just making it and finishing it off. It's about thinking about how it can be dealt with in the future, in terms of breaking it down or not breaking it down, but just reupholstering it. I mean, reupholstery is a relatively easy process. I say, yeah. I need to be careful. But it's a relatively easy process when you know how to do it. But I think there are ways of making it really hard for somebody in the future to do it. And there's ways that you can make it easier. And I think that's what I would always pass on.
If you're making a piece from scratch, or if you're reupholstering, I guess one big thing that came out for me was history tagging. So the story is to pass that on, and I think there's interesting things going into whether they're going to be tagged into the piece or branded, because as I said, this issue.
So what do you mean by history tagging?
Well,
physically putting something within the product that explains
well, that
where
would be
it's
lovely,
come
and
from.
or pass it on literally to the purchaser. But there's lots of things happening now with digital, so that you can actually, you know, in fashion it's happening. History tagging, where it's all kept like a barcode online, so that you can reach that and find where your cottons come from, and given that my background is textiles, I think, again, even on the upholstery, that textile that you've taken off this chair that you're reupholstering, where does that textile go? Does that go in the bin? Because that's still just another value thing. And if you could pass on the textile that you're upholstering with what that is, we're coming to a stage in the next 5 years, we're going to see amazing industry within the recycled textile. It's happening with mixed fibre. It's just not yet here, but it's beginning. And it's interesting, a woman called Warren again, who's Cindy, I can't remember her surname, but she's American but living here, developing with a chemist and industry. There will be, and which I'm just so looking forward to, someone who's going to take your textile away and it will get recycled, not just burnt, or, I mean, used as stuffing and things. That's all great, but yeah, I think that's what I'd say. History tag, story tag.
Cool. Good advice. Thank you, guys. Right. Questions from you guys. Who's going to go first? Thank you.
I'd be interested to know what the panel think about whether it's possible to be vegan and sustainable.
Okay. I should have warned you about this. I'm just going to repeat all the questions so our microphone picks them up. So the question was, is it possible to be sustainable and vegan in upholstery?
I guess
That's
it
a really
probably
good question,
comes
huh?
down to landmass, monoculture. I suppose I actually did have to produce a piece last year for a vegan. It was very important for them that there was absolutely no animal fibres in there whatsoever. With the materials available to us, of course, it was all doable. But then for me, it's possibly one of the reasons why my investigations in sustainability have shied away to some extent. If I'm guilty of anything, it's possibly shying away from organic fibres, primarily because of my concerns over monoculture and displacing other animals, so that we can grow the crop to make a chair with. So for me, I guess that I think that's probably where the issues would be. But most vegans will be well versed in actually their footprint. Or most vegans probably live on one world, but generally, population, we need about 2.5 worlds to sustain someone in the UK if they live a meat-based sort of life. So yeah, it'd be interesting to. I am quite interested in looking at how that will pan out, but at the moment I just don't feel I sort of know enough about it, and actually really I guess it's probably part of this history-taking thing, like the origin of where the materials are coming from, and understanding our indigenous peoples and species being displaced to enable us to use that fibre in our Western world.
Good question, thank you.
Have you tried? Tina, have you tried? No, not yet. And it's something I've been quite interested in, because when I started at London Met, I thought, oh my god, it's just like a vegan horror story. It's like my close friends have been. It's like animal hair and God knows what feathers and stuff everywhere, and I thought this new sheep, if you weren't expecting it, it could be a real shock.
I know there's someone else in here actually is allergic, who was one of the students is allergic to horsehair and latex. So when I was there last year, it was kind of like this question of how do we use, what else can I use that isn't necessarily foam? So it's kind of
wool.
quite a similar thing, what do you do?
Wool?
Yeah, but there's certain, I mean I know we've spoken about materials quite a lot, but everyone in here is kind of like a craftsman as well, and using those sustainable materials is very specific to technique, and I think what we all really enjoy is the technical aspect of it. I mean, we love using those materials and we love doing the stitching. If anyone's watched our mum today, they're just going to be like, what? But, so I think wool doesn't really, you can't really do it with wool. You can't do those stitches, you can't get those edges, you can't do those techniques that we're being taught.
No, but using, I'm just kind of thinking all the materials in the product, and I mean you could buy a Coco Lock, which is coconut fibre and latex in sheet form, which that is. So there's no animal hair in that at all. So you do away with the needled wool over the top of it, and you replace that with. Well, you could use polyester, but I'm trying to think of a natural, sustainable material.
There's a cotton and hemp.
Well, yeah, I was going to say there's. Yeah, there's going to be materials that you can use.
Who aren't here, I think they're sort of researching quite a lot.
And then
polyester style,
I mean, they do this amazing product. Have you seen it? It's made from recycled plastic bottles. It's just like super springy, and it comes out in
3-dimensional fabric. No,
it's an actual material that you can use as an upholstery.
No, I haven't.
And it's like a sort of
Spring system almost.
well, it's really springy, and it's almost like spaghetti. Like it's incredible.
Is it from PET? Do you know? PET.
That I don't know, but Enkev are pretty.
They're good on that.
They're pretty on it.
But,
I don't know.
You could, from a commercial point of view, you could certainly start to look at moving away from some of those materials. You might have to have. I don't know if you could do it without latex. So that would be the hard one. I think it's harder to do it without latex than it would be to do it without hair.
You've got the traditional techniques.
But then it's not commercial.
Yeah.
No, so how do we make the craft sustainable so that it is commercial? Because that was one of my questions. Is because as someone who's doing it because of that, because I actually really enjoy it.
Yeah.
And that probably goes for most of the people in here. How do we make that sustainable? Because it isn't commercially viable for, obviously not maybe for manufacturing, but maybe
I don't think you're far off. To be honest, I don't think it is. You're far off from making it commercially. I mean, through these materials, it is. Yes,
it's happening.
It is happening. Yeah.
But how do I then enjoy using those materials as much as I enjoy using,
the traditional,
the technical aspect of it.
Yeah.
So are you asking more about the sustainability of the craft
Yeah,
in
I
terms
guess
of
so,
how you
yeah.
make a living as a
Yeah.
traditional upholsterer?
Yeah, but in a way that's
In a modern world.
in a
To be honest,
modern world. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, because I'm not massively interested in reupholstering people's furniture.
But when I was at university, one of the
Just the techniques, like
Yeah.
Alex has, shown from doing his beach chair that he's applied all those, any upholsterer in here will look at that beach chair and understand all of those traditional
Yeah,
techniques.
yeah.
But it's not traditional in the materials that he's used.
Okay, yeah.
So he hasn't just made like a sheet of something and then whacked it on.
Yeah.
He's actually done the stuffing ties and the bridal ties and the stitching and and all the things that we all really enjoy.
That's
So that's
perceived
what I'm
value,
saying.
isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's
And I think to Corinne's point about stories, I think consumers increasingly want provenance,
They do,
authenticity.
provenance, that word.
They want a story.
Yeah.
They want to learn about that stuff, so that and part of that comes about because of social media. Part of that is look at my new chair and it's made by this person and using these techniques. And I think we've got an audience that is interested. But I do worry that sometimes we sit in a little craft design bubble and we think there's a very educated audience out there, and actually I was sitting in Stansted Airport in Wetherspoons at 8 o'clock in the morning relatively recently with a design colleague. We were looking around us and I was like, these are people.
Yeah.
Like, we think these are people,
Yeah.
but actually in terms of the majority of the population. No, but what I'm saying is in terms of something making it to the mainstream, that's your audience.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's difficult. I'm going to come to both of you in just a second. I had a question down here, lady in blue.
Well, I'm the very lady that she was talking about with the allergies, but I've also got the latex allergy, which is equally a growing phenomenon in the world.
Yes.
And an awful lot of people do not realise
Yeah.
that it's what they're sitting on
Yeah.
and everything,
Yeah.
and what we're using. So it is the children that are coming through,
Yeah.
the rising incidence of allergies.
Yeah.
That's also
We
down
need
to the
to be
chemicals
aware
we're
of.
using in the fire
Yeah.
retardants and stuff.
Yeah.
So we do that research annoyingly is happening, but it's not happening quick enough. We're going to be told in another 5 years' time those sofas with that FR have been giving us cancers. It's happening. We're going to know.
Yeah.
And and this is my point about commercial and consumer. So if we could create a law that for houses, for home living, that is banned because of that reason, because people fall asleep on their sofas, they hang out on their sofas, we literally do sleep on our sofa beds. I do.
I was writing a sort of a blog post
And
about
commercial
foam
has that still.
Yeah.
Sorry.
the other day, and the sort of
Oh,
health
we don't even
implications.
smoke in buildings anymore, and
Yeah.
all this came about because of smoking. Sorry,
That's
Stop
true,
that.
actually.
Well, we could
because
immediately wipe
we
out
could wipe
the
it out.
necessity
We
to
really
cigarette
could.
test
And
commercially
I wanna press for
tested
that.
furniture.
Can you all write a letter? It's just like
It's a really
seriously.
good point.
It's
That
really
actually-
That's
it
very
really
true.
is.
Why
very
is
it.
commercial furniture
Yeah.
cigarette tested
Yeah.
now? Legislation has moved elsewhere. It's now obsolete.
Move on.
Yeah.
Move on.
There's a percentage of every metre of fabric you buy that's is compliant
And
with,
what
with
the
that
fabric
regulation.
people have to do
Become
with that is
obsolete.
just massive. Yeah. Sorry.
Right. Lots of
Very
thoughts. Over there, and then I'm going to come to you.
It sort of ties in two points that you've made. So, Tim, you were talking about, is it your Oscar sofa?
Yeah.
And you were saying it is sustainable, but you don't market it as sustainable, which I thought was quite interesting. You said it's quite a high price point and people pay for it. I'm interested, why don't you market it as sustainable? Because just sorry, just
They probably will
then-
now.
Yeah, well, I think
Then you were just saying, sorry, Katie, just that exact point about we're in our little design bubble.
Yeah.
And I wonder if we do market ourselves as sustainable, people immediately go, it's going to be much more expensive, I'll go elsewhere.
Yeah, I
So-
think that's part of the reason that
Yeah.
we haven't done it.
But you already get a very discerning customer anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I
So,
think SCP customers are expecting a certain price
Yeah.
point when they walk in the door, aren't they?
Value.
Yeah, they are. Yeah,
Value
so
and
I
provenance.
genuinely don't know. I mean, I know it's a discussion that is had quite a lot. I don't have anything to do with the marketing of the company, and I'm very much back of house, as it were, in terms of I just produce it. But
Very important.
yeah,
The VIP.
That was interesting. That 'cause
I don't know.
Yeah.
It is. I mean,
Because I think it's the point that if we all say, oh oh, we're making stuff and it's sustainable, and
Mm.
obviously, you know, all the people in the design world would be like, that's fantastic, that's exactly what we want. But tons of people that go, I just want something I can sit on. I'm not interested. I'll go to the upholsterer around the corner.
I think
There is that thing.
I mean, I did see a couple of years ago one upholstery company up in Leeds, manufacturer, promoting their stuff as sustainable, environmentally friendly. I think they, and we kind of had issue with it because no matter what you try, there are elements of whether it's making the springs or whatever that isn't environmentally friendly. There's a lot of process. So and to, I mean, I haven't used this phrase for a long time, but a cradle to grave scenario for upholstery is almost impossible to do. So until you can actually do that, well, it's cradle to cradle, or sorry, because there's no more grave because it's circular. Sorry. That's why I haven't used it for such a long time. But the grave could well be that it's not necessarily.
Well, no, absolutely. I mean, wool, for instance, you know,
redundant.
wool, parts of wool will end up in the land and can get resold.
Yeah,
I mean, everything
it
does end up
becomes
in land.
a
It's just
compost
a
or whatever.
compost,
Yeah.
exactly, yeah.
So, but I don't think until you can quantify whether something is genuinely sustainable or truly sustainable, I think it's hard to promote it. But it is a discussion that is.
Yeah, it's not like you think it adds even more value to say
Yeah.
promote it as sustainable.
I know they're just trying to promote the sofas as well made. You know, there's going to be the longevity, and that we use high quality fillings and materials within them.
Quality.
The issue I have is that I think, and I don't know if you guys have noticed it, but I've noticed it more recently, is the quality of feathers is deteriorating massively. There's no curl, and there's no natural curl anymore.
Do you know why that is? They're mainly being imported from China.
Because they're
Coming
killing.
in
Well, they're
with
plucking
probably all
they're plucking the animals far too early.
so,
Yeah, I don't know, but it is. I mean, if you upholster a sofa that's 20 years old now and compare it to a cushion that's a brand new one that you bought from United Fillings or whoever, the quality of feathers is so much lower. It's, you know, and that's hard.
Yeah. Question right in the front.
It's been a really brilliant discussion, by the way. Thanks ever so much. The issue is definitely about the little design bubble that we're all in. We're all selling to people who are interested but wealthy, actually. And when someone comes into my workshop and is like, I was going to throw this thing away, but, you know, maybe you can zhuzh it up. I already know they've got no value to this thing. And that's almost impossible. And it happened, we were in Heels just recently for a month, and we had lots of people coming in going, oh, I've got this thing, can you reupholster it? So very casually when I have those conversations with the consumer, they want a cheap option. They don't want, they're not thinking like longevity. Then they get into this conversation they're not used to having because they're not seeking out upholsterers because they're not doing that, and they're saying, well, like, what's the point then? And I'm like, well, you know, like, keep your sofa, longevity, the story behind it, it's grandma's, keep it going, and they're like, I've had it for 5 years, I don't want that shape or whatever anymore. So all of that value in what they're looking at, so even if they were to be into everything else, they still want to change. But the people that we work with, you know, they bring us designer furniture, they're into their like traditional mid-century or whatever it is, and that tiny thing that we do, we can sell, it's going to last forever, it's going to outlive you, we're going to, you know, build this blah blah blah, and they get it, but we're talking to like a tiny percentage of the population. And the worst thing is that I've worked for quite a high-end upholstery, like West London, selling kind of to West London. That stuff was being sold at great price, probably not being sat on at all. Do you know what I mean? Some of this stuff, and might even be being replaced in a year's time. Completely replaced, by the way, and being
But it
thrown
won't go
away.
to the dump.
Well, it probably will be.
Really?
I think
because
that's
no
where
one's got interior designers. They've got no rights to take some famous person's, you know, furniture and give it to someone else. Like, it's got no home suddenly because it used to belong to someone else. So and in fact, the more you pay for something, the less it's being used. And I bet you almost every DFS sofa that's being bought is being sat on percentage-wise, more it's least capable. Well, not least capable, but maybe some of these cheaper sofas are least capable of handling all of that heavy-duty weight and pressure and use.
Yeah, the more we have these kind of conversations, though, the more that it comes into people's worlds, and somehow it, it's like a little drip feed effect, and hopefully maybe people start thinking about it a little bit more. And I totally get what you're saying about it being a small percentage of people being able to, afford my chairs. I know that for one, and that makes me a little bit sad, but you have to start from somewhere.
Yeah, you do. And actually, John Lewis came to us and said, we've got this argument, what's, like, one half of the department just wants to sell cheap. Buy cheap and sell cheap, and the other half of the department's fighting because they still think that our brand represents quality to their consumers. But we can't afford it and sell it and make people buy.
Well, what's
how do we tell?
Education,
the
but they blame
you help educate
that's
our
good.
consumer.
That's good.
And so that's like a conversation.
It is a conversation.
But John, like maybe a big brand like that has to now get on board with having something
it will
in their
have to
store
say, I know
that
Marks and
explains.
Spencer's, I think in some of the fit outs that they have in their stores, they think about more, sort of using more sustainable materials and things like that. And I think there is a kind of slightly slow change that's happening, but
On the very last point, sorry, that we were then approached by someone just recently doing a headboard, high-end brand. They finally, after a lot of fuss and faff, they've suddenly shipped in some new products, like tiny little pocket springs in sheets and hemp and cotton mix and whatever, and that's what they want the headboard to be made out of. And then they were like, and it's another selling point because it's all these sustainable materials. Now, although I was just like, I like that, the first thought that went in my head is, how are you going to qualify this? Because there are various bits. I was like, apart from the springs and the polyester that's around the thing. I started saying all this stuff. They loved the idea, and then I was like,
we
how
are being
are
sold
you going to
that.
qualify?
It's like organic. We're being sold organic, and then if you read the jar, it says
Yes.
non-organic brackets, non-organic, but the product says organic. Whether it's a tin of tomatoes.
But
or
I
whatever,
think there's something around that, isn't there? That if it's that sort of thing about when you go vegetarian, everyone's like, but you're wearing leather shoes, and you're sort of like, well, in order to do something good, you become a hypocrite because it's impossible to do everything good. And so I kind of think it's better to be a good hypocrite than not try. Do you know what I mean? And I think we were talking about the idea that perhaps you say, at the moment, we're doing these things, and we aim to do these things by this date.
And in fact,
so rather
big
than just
companies
saying,
do say that. The big ones.
Yeah, I mean, you get a lot of
interface. They will say this is our target for 2020.
Yeah, which I think is better than that thing where it's like we use organic ingredients where possible. Yeah, which just sounds like a big cop out. Whereas I think if you can qualify things that sort of say,
just
this is
quoted
what we've
from
done
our
so
website,
far.
wasn't it?
And this is what we're working towards. At least that has some credibility.
I think we for us as a manufacturer, we're finding a balance between using sustainable and non-sustainable materials, and I did find out from Prima that they are working on a water-based foam. It's nowhere near getting ready to market, but maybe that's where we go. And like you're saying, if we can put pressure on the organisations like Fire and what have you, that will be my call tomorrow.
Yes.
To say, why are we cigarette testing commercial fabrics when, one, they have sprinkler systems in their buildings anyway.
Over the next month, make that call.
Yeah.
Ask that question. And textile companies, they're so stitched up with these things.
Right, well, on that beautiful pun.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Sorry.
One more point.
Yes, as long as it ends with a pun.
Hey, Alex, the rubbish one. The rubbish one.
But can I, on communicating the sort of the message of what we're doing, there's a lovely example here of some guys who are on telly, kind of talking to the people at Stansted in the bar at 8 o'clock in the morning. Like the great British public, they get to see on TV now upholsterers actually reimagining, taking things apart, putting them back in a way that a general member of the public probably couldn't conceive, and then actually putting that forward. And we need to be applauded for that, absolutely. But we're all, the elephant in the room. Well, actually, we're sat in the elephant because Second Sitters is the coolest exhibition, and the best way of communicating something that is I struggle to. It's so connected to every fibre of my body. I can't really rate it. Well, it's explained beautifully there.
That's
in
that's,
that room,
that's better
and
than a
actually-
pun.
So yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. That's great.
Thank you. That was
Really good. I think the fact that we could have sold it twice and we've run over by half an hour speaks volumes.
Yeah.